Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining us for this Allen Heath webinar today, where we'll be talking all about our exciting new custom control software and app. I'm David Kirk, I'm Head of Brand Marketing for Allen Heath, and demonstrating custom control will be my colleague Nick Beretta.
Hi everyone.
And Nick is Head of Product Marketing. Before we get into custom control, I just want to point out that there is a question box in the GoToWebinar interface, and we'll be very, very happy to answer your questions. Please do type them in, and we'll answer as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. So before we get too deep into custom control itself, I know many of you will be quite familiar with our dLive installed systems, but it's important to have a quick reminder of the architecture, the philosophy of dLive, because that's what allows us to do things like custom control. And the starting point really for us, and it's been a long journey, was looking at the role of the mixer. What is a mixer essentially? And we boiled it down to this very abstracted mixer, which is a box which combines the engine, the processing that does the mixing, the inputs and outputs which allow that unit to talk to the outside world, and then the control that allows people to use it. And that kind of simple model actually covers most of the mixers in the world today, and it's very appropriate for many scenarios, but it has its limitations, particularly when it comes to installation applications. And that's why we've been on this mission to separate the three elements, the three core elements. So there's still the engine at the heart of every system that does the processing, the mixing, it's the brain. Then you have the I/O as a separate entity. And what that allows you to do is have very, very flexible and scalable systems. So you can have a system using our dLive platform, which could be a single room, or it could be an entire campus, if that's what you want to do. So you can put the I/O where you really want it. Also, you're free to use whatever your favored networking protocol is. But for me, I think the bit where dLive and our philosophy gets most exciting is around control, because obviously with a traditional mixer, there are limits on who can interact with it and how they can interact with it. But by separating the control from that processing brain, we can open up lots of very exciting possibilities for all kinds of users and uses. And you can probably see behind us, one of the ways you can control a dLive system is through a mixing surface, a kind of console, if you like. But that, again, is the preserve of trained volunteers or skilled professionals. We do have some control hardware that simplifies control of the systems, this IP range of remote controllers. And Nick, perhaps you could take us very quickly through those.
Yeah, sure. So the IP1, IP8, IP6, they are configurable controllers for the dLive mixing systems. They're all PoE powered, PoE plus in case of the IP8, and TCP/IP networkable, so they can coexist on your normal network for control for any other network service you might have on the same corporate infrastructure. You can have up to 16 of each type in a system. The IP1 is a very simple and elegant wall plate controller. It comes in US or European variants to suit different gang box sizes, and Decora plates or Euroblock plates. So you can pick whatever finish you want for the plate. The controller module itself can be ordered in black or white. And as you can see, it's just a very simple push and turn dual function rotary encoder and an LCD display. So you can imagine uses like simple level control for a room, but also preset changes if you want to change the configuration of a room by pressing the button and scrolling through a list. Or maybe source selection. So again, I've got control of the level, but I can press the button and choose the music source for the room. IP8 and IP6, a lot more control in a desktop format this time. IP8 comes with 8 motorized faders and LCD displays and a bunch of configurable keys that can be assigned to pretty much any function in the system, from mutes to scene recalls, layer changes, and so on. And the IP6, similarly, 6 push and turn rotary encoders, 6 LCD displays, and configurable keys.
Thanks, Nick. Now, of course, in the installation world, the potential for touchscreen technology has been recognized for a long time, and there are some dominant protocols. I'm thinking AMX, Crestron, and Extron in this field. And Nick, we recently released drivers for these platforms.
We did, that's right. So these drivers are all about facilitating the adoption of our kit, of our mixing systems into the AV integration industry. Up to a few months ago, we had control protocols that an integrator could take, read through the spec, and start writing from scratch a control interface for any of our mixers. And that's still possible, of course, but what we did, we worked in conjunction with some lead developers of Crestron AMX modules and also with Extron directly to provide these drivers on our website, on the Crestron website, as starting points, really, that an integrator can take, start playing around with the interface, assign the control elements to whatever functions they like, or a channel or mute function they like, or scene change again. And really they should be able to get up and running in a matter of hours if they are familiar with the Crestron AMX or Extron system.
Now, we also have been developing more and more software solutions for working with our dLive platform. You may be familiar with Mixpad, which is a remote mixing app for dLive, and there's Director, which is the software which is used both for live mixing control, it provides full control, and also for offline setup of the system. But it's true to say that neither of these were designed with a casual user in mind. They're a professional's tool. And this is where custom control gives us something very new and different. So what is custom control? There are two core elements to it. One is the custom control editor, which is software used by the integrator, and they use that to create custom interfaces for their clients. And then for the end user, they'll be using the custom control app and whatever interface have been created for them. And the clue is in the name, really, with custom control. It is hugely customizable, so it really is only limited by your imagination. You can create lots of different kinds of interface. So, for example, in a venue, you might have the AV team who require a certain level of complexity in the interface. And then for the hospitality team, they might just want simple source select level control, the kind of thing you might find on an IP1, actually. Going back to the AV team, though, perhaps they might want different kinds of control depending on what device they're using and where they are. So when they're roaming around with their phone, they might have one level of control, and when they're at their desk with their laptop, they might have more extensive control. Really, like so much in installation, it's down to understanding the needs of the users and then giving them a system that works for them. Some of the considerations we've had to look at, one is kiosk mode. Obviously, in many installation situations, the last thing you want is for the all-important control to be on a laptop or an iPad that somebody wanders off with, or that they've decided to close the application on. So we do accommodate kiosk mode. Also, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, users expect more and more to turn up at a venue and be able to have some kind of control. So we can facilitate bring your own device with custom control. Naturally, there is the option to password protect it though. So you don't want just anybody walking in off the street and deciding to switch off some speakers and turn up the volume, whatever. We have considered all the main kinds of hardware you would expect to find coming into a venue. So iPhones, iPads, Android tablets, Android phones, MacBooks, PC, laptops, all of those are accommodated by custom control. And the last thing I'd like to highlight before, Nick, you can show us around custom control itself, is that you have the option to customize the look and feel of the interface, not just the functionality. So there is a library, and you'll see some of it in a moment, of different faders and buttons and meters and so on. But you can, if you wish, upload your own images to use for those. You can adapt the background to fit the branding of the venue or the decor of the venue. It really is down to how much time you want to put in and your own imagination. So I think that's enough preamble. Nick, let's get it fired up.
Yeah. So talking of customization, let's have a look at how we can build a custom interface. So I launched the custom control editor on my MacBook in this case, and I can see 3 different options available for me at startup. One is to create a new configuration, and we'll go into that in a second. The other one is to load an existing configuration from my hard drive or from my computer. The third one is to download an existing configuration that is already living in my mixing system. This might be useful if, for example, you lost the original design, or maybe you're doing a service call into a venue where they have custom control in use and they need to change something, they need to diagnose some problems. So you can simply download the configuration on your custom control editor, provided, of course, you have the admin password if a password is set for that system. So let's create a new configuration. As you can see, by default, I have one user interface, which is that blank canvas in the center of my screen now. If I wanted, I could create multiple interfaces. And this means that, for example, I can have different interfaces for different users, as David was saying, or different device types. So as I create a new one, you can see some attributes, some properties for the user interface, or layout, as we call it. The first one is the name. Then you have the option to assign this layout to all users, or to specify which user profiles in my mixing system will be able to see this interface, to which users I want to present this interface. So I could say this is for the admin user, or maybe admin and a second one like the operator. And of course, you can separate them with commas and type in the name of the user profiles. Also can set the device types that I want this interface to work with. As David said a minute ago, you can have one type of interface on your desktop machine, on your laptop, and a completely different type of interface with more basic controls, perhaps on your phone or tablet device. You can also choose if you want this interface to work only in portrait mode or only in landscape mode, or any of those. And this is quite powerful because it means that I can create an interface that works for the same user, the same device type, but in a presenting a different set of controls on whether you are in portrait or landscape mode. In other words, that means that I can rotate my iPad or Android tablet, and I would get an alternative set of controls presented to me when I do that. So quite cool, actually. Scenes, again, in most applications, this box will be set to all, so that any scene you run in your dLive mixing system, the interface will not change to the user of that device. Typically, you might want to change many scenes during a performance, during a show, and you wouldn't want those changes to affect what user interface other users of the system might be playing with. However, there is a possibility to specify one or multiple scenes which will trigger this interface and deploy it to the users we have specified in this window. So if for example, if I set scene number 25 in here, that means that every time scene 25 is recalled in my system by custom control or by any other means of recalling a scene, this specific interface will be pushed live in an instant to these users and these device types. So you can imagine very advanced setups where I could even have a home screen in my interface recalling different scenes. Each one will in turn present a different interface back to me. And that is quite powerful, as I said. Of course, that relies on you knowing what show file you're using for that venue, and possibly using the permissions and the filters on the scenes to lock out any parameter that you don't want to change when changing the user interface. And finally, down here, we have the option to fix the aspect ratio. So by default, this is not fixed. So the interface will scale automatically and resize depending on your device size and screen resolution. In some cases, you might want to fix that so that, for example, your company logo or custom graphics would not rescale and stretch unpredictably with different device sizes. So once you're ready with all of these options, you just click OK, and we have now two user interfaces, two layouts to play with. So let me open one of these and go into the layout editor mode, as you can see on the top. Now this white space in the center is my user interface. And we can start dragging in some control objects or elements and see how these behave into my user interface. Let's start with something as simple as a rectangle. It might seem a little bit pointless, but bear with me, and it's a very good way of showing you some of the options that we have here on top, including cut, copy, and paste. Of course, you can use your keyboard shortcuts for this as well. And if you go into the help file up here, you will find a lot of other keyboard shortcuts that could really speed up your design process, especially if you end up using custom control very often. Now back to my rectangle. On the top, I have other options, for example, to display a grid. And this will, a grid means that I can very simply choose to snap my element positioning onto the nearest available line. I can also resize the grid. So if I want finer adjustment, but still with the reassurance that they are all aligned between themselves, I can do that. So I can turn on or off snap mode and the grid visibility, and also the grid color. So if I'm working on a black or gray background, I might want to switch the color of the grid. Another option that you have here is the fill. So the fill will essentially stretch my currently selected object to full height and full width if I wanted. And effectively becoming, in this case, a good background for my application, for my user interface.
They do all the groundwork.
On the right of the properties, you can check the properties of the selected object. And for example, in this case, we can tweak the color. So if I wanted to change the color of my background, I could do it easily that way. Now, what if you wanted a custom background in your interface instead of a simple rectangle? Let me take this rectangle out and I'll replace it with an image. This very simple image. In my properties pane on the right, I can click on the plus button and I can select any image from my hard disk or from my image library. For example, let's take this blackboard image, and again, let's stretch it in height and width so that it will fill the user interface and become a background. Let's take some other control elements now. For example, our text label. So this is a static label. Once again, we can change the text that is displayed in the properties. Let's call it Art College. The alignment, the font, and the text color. So let's say I want this white, and it will stay there as a static piece of text in my interface. What else? The tab container. This is a very powerful tool in custom control. So this can take any size in your user interface, but I think in most applications you will probably want it full size, and that's because what this does is it will present up to 4 different tabs with 4 different sets of controls and text and custom images. For example, to control different zones in a building. So it can be the lobby and the bar, the restaurant in a hospitality setting. And that means that with a single interface, you can really control many different zones with a lot of controls without even starting to play with the scene association we discussed earlier, or with different user profiles. So the same user with the same device can have access to multiple tabs. How many? Well, we can cater for up to 10 tabs. So if I were to change the number of tabs in there, you can see many more tabs can appear on the screen. Let's go back to 4, for example. I can rename these tabs. So I can call this one bar, I can call the second one lobby, and so on. I can change the color of the tabs displayed on the top. And from now on, anything that I add to this tab that I have selected now, bar, will only be visible in this tab, and similarly for the others. But you notice that the background of the tabs by default is transparent, so anything that I previously added to my configuration will still be there as the background. Of course, if you wanted, you could set a custom background per tab. So if I bring in another rectangle once again, and I maybe change the color of that to a light gray and stretch it up and down. Now, because I brought this into the lobby tab and not on the background of the interface, this will only be the visible background for the lobby tab only. So if I switch to bar, I'm back to my transparent view of the user interface background. Now, up to this point, we've only played around with the looks of it. We are really not controlling anything yet. So let me drag in some control elements to have a look at how we can assign them to actual functions in the mixing system. And we'll start with something like a button. So with a button in my properties on the right, I have things like, again, the size, the positioning, the text, if I wanted to add a custom label to it, the font. Off and on images, these are quite important because essentially this is what specifying how the button looks like. So if I click on the option box over there, you will see some default shapes in there, and you can also switch between different themes. So these are a collection of control elements which you can use across all the control elements, faders, knobs, rotaries, if you want them to look consistent across your user interface. So you could choose, for example, to use always theme 2 for all of your control elements across the interface. Some of these themes might work best on a lighter background. Some of these might work best on a darker background. But you can see that we have some very nice options available in there. So let's pick, for example, theme 2 and the first image available in there. Now, it's important that you also go and specify the on image in this case to match the same button shape and theme. Otherwise, you would have a situation where when you click on a button that would unpredictably change shape because another shape is being specified for that button.
I hate it when that happens.
Yes, David here wouldn't really like it.
No.
Now, you can also specify the color for when the button is in the on position. So for when you press the button or the button is showing activity on for example, on a mute or something, you wanted to, you can specify what color that would look like. So for example, let's pick a yellowish color for that, and we'll see it in action in a minute. Press and hold time, that's if I want the button to be instantaneous, or if I want a hold down time before the button actually triggers the action. And finally, the action, the function this is assigned to. So is this a mute? Is this a scene recall in my system, tap tempo, custom MIDI? That's quite a powerful one because it means you can actually type in a custom MIDI string for the press of the button and for the release of the button. So for example, like a MIDI note on, note off event, and that will be broadcast from the dLive to any MIDI-enabled device over TCP/IP. And also another interesting one for installation is the level up and down. So in many applications, instead of giving full fader control or rotary control, you want to give very basic up and down buttons to turn the level up or down in a very simple way. So you can do that with a custom control. Oh, very good. I seem to have launched Siri accidentally. That's not part of custom control, so don't worry, no one is listening to your commands with your voice yet. So let's carry on with our demo. From the buttons, we move on to level controls like rotaries and faders. So again, for these, I can do the same thing in my properties. I can specify which color, which theme I want to use. In this case, let's pick something from the same theme, number 2. I'll choose this one and perhaps tweak it to the same color so that again, it will look consistent. And with my fader, same story again. So I'll pick something in theme number 2, like this one here, and assign the same color to it. I can obviously resize some of these objects. So if I want the fader to be higher or lower or bigger, I can do that. And also once the fader is selected, let's have a look at the other properties we have available here. One is to show the scale or not. So for non-technical operators, you might not want to show the dB scale on the fader. It might make no sense at all to some people. Also, you can change the background image of the fader. You can change the knob image. And I know David is not going to like this, but I have to show you how you could potentially use a custom image for the knob of your rotaries or faders. So if I bring in, for example, an ampersand as my knob image, all of a sudden you'll see that I can drag the fader up and down with a red ampersand instead of a classic fader knob.
But you would never do that because that's so wrong in so many ways.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure that's not one of the allowed uses of our company logo, David. Right, still on the fader, the function of the fader. So what is this fader controlling? Is it the main level or is it a send level to a mix? And what channel type and what channel number I want to control? So input number 1, for example. And also you have an option down here called audio taper. In the on position, the fader will behave essentially like the fader on a mixing console, which is a non-linear scale called, in fact, audio taper. If I switch this option off, though, I can now specify a range of gain, maximum and minimum gain, that I want the user to have control of. Again, in installs, that's very useful because I might want to limit the maximum gain to 0 dB unity gain, and maybe limit the minimum gain so that there's no risk of someone turning off completely the music in a room or something. I can also specify whether I want the minimum position of the fader knob to be always -infinity, regardless of the range I have specified. So this means that when the fader is full scale down, this will effectively mute the audio for that channel. So that's an extra option you have available. What else? We have a bunch of LEDs and meters available as well. So from classic meters that you can assign to any input or output channel and select at which point of the signal path you want the meter to source to monitor the channel. You can also bring in gain reduction meters for your compressors and gates, and also something called the chromatic channel meter. This is something that we developed for the SQ range of mixers. And again, you can see a lot of properties on the right, including, once again, the appearance of the control element. But also in this case, because it's a chromatic channel meter, you can set the thresholds and the colors for your signal metering. So a chromatic channel meter was a way in the SQ design process where we could pack a lot of metering information into a single point source LED with variable brightness and color. And we thought that this would be very useful in custom control as well. So you can pack a lot of metering information of many channels into the smallest possible space. Now, something that people like doing in a lot of interfaces is, for example, to use the transparency property of objects to maybe put things behind certain other control elements. And I'll make just a very quick example by making use of the grid in this case, which is very useful because I can essentially position a meter object behind a fader. So within the same amount of space, I can control the fader and have the meter visible behind it. Another couple of control elements before we move on. One is the source selector, which you can essentially assign to one of the 20 available source selectors in the dLive mixing system. So in the dLive, there are options to select any number of sources, name these sources, assign them to a source selector, assign the output of that source selector, and even crossfade times between the sources. All you have to do in custom control is point this object to one of the 20 source selectors. And you can change the appearance from a swipe box, which means that you can swipe left and right and touch OK to confirm the source, or to a combo box where you can just touch once to display a vertical list of sources, and then touch on the source that you want. The last one in our list is the dynamic label. Dynamic label can be assigned to any text piece of information from the mixer, like, for example, a channel name. And that's a very good way of, for example, labeling a fader so that it will always display the channel name no matter what scene or show file I'm using tonight. So I could change show files. I could even load a guest show file into my mixer. The configuration and custom control interface will still be there, and this dynamic label will display what channel I'm actually controlling now with this fader, instead of a static bit of text that we put in custom control. Right, so let's have a look at some of the other options that we have on top here. We have things like align and order. This should be familiar enough to any of you who work day to day with the Office suite of programs or even graphic design tools. So for example, I could take multiple, oops, let's undo that. If I want to take multiple controls and copy and paste them around the screen, and then all of a sudden I say, well, I want to tidy up all of these, I can select multiples and I can say I want to align them all to the bottom or all to the top or the center. Also, maybe I want to distribute them evenly, horizontally or vertically, so that there's an even distance between them. So this is a way of starting out with something that might look a little bit messy, a little bit tentative, and then tidying up before you get to the final result, tidying up all the graphics. Another very useful tool is the Resource Manager. You can see the button up here. The Resource Manager is a quick way of changing one graphic image file in my configuration that I might be using again and again across my configuration and user interface. So something like a custom fader knob or the background picture. If I wanted to change that without doing it manually for all of the instances of that picture, I can go into the Resource Manager, click on the picture I want to change, click on the Replace or Change button, and select my new image. In this case, for example, this background that I have here, if I go back to the layout editor, you will see that that's been replaced for me. Now that's not looking very nice with the control elements we put in. So let's go back to the blackboard just for a second, and back to my layout editor again. Okay, so once I'm ready to test this interface, I have a couple of options available on the top left. To start with, the way I'm displaying the interface. So I'm working now in landscape 4/3, and assuming I haven't fixed my ratio in the attributes of this layout, I can go and check very quickly how that would look when I use maybe a 16:9 type of device resolution, or even a portrait device like a phone. And you can see quickly that everything rescales, including some of the controls like the fader knobs and so on. And that's why in some cases you might want to actually fix that aspect ratio instead. The other option that we have is this play button here, which is essentially to enter a test or emulate mode. So this will bring up my interface full screen on my MacBook in this case, and I can start playing around with my ampersand fader knob, sorry David, or any of the other controls. I can change tab and so on. I can also connect to the system, and this will display a list of any compatible mix rack in my network. I can connect to it and I can actually test this user interface. But I guess you agree with me that this is a bit pointless at this stage. It doesn't really mean a lot in terms of any practical use case. So let me close this one and load quickly a more practical, a more sensible user interface, which we built a few days ago. This is a theater example. You can see I have two different layouts in there. The one to the left, that's set to work with phone devices only and in portrait mode only. The one to the right is set to work with the same users in this case, but actually on desktop and tablet devices only. Now, again, I can go into my layout editor, make any change I like. I can press the test or play button to check that everything visually looks fine. And if I want to check it with the mix rack, I can connect to the mix rack. You can see I'm using dLive with version 1.8.1 of the firmware, which is recommended for custom control. It will work with version 1.8.0 and higher, but 181 brings in some improvements to the custom control interface. So if I press connect here, I'm actually live with the mixer now. I can test all of my controls. The faders are actually moving on my C1500 on my back. I can test the different scenes and so on. But at this stage, I am still in Custom Control Editor, just testing out an interface which I have locally on my computer. The beauty of custom control is actually when you're done with your interface and you want to now upload it to the mixing system. So I'm happy with this. I tested it. It's all working fine. I want to upload it to my mix rack. I can select my mix rack. If I had an admin password, once again, I obviously would have to type it in. In this case, I just click upload. You can see it takes just an instant. Even though we have custom graphics and images in this configuration, it took less than a second to upload it to our mix rack. And I'm using a standard consumer access point on our back. So this is now connected to our mix rack. And David, perhaps we can switch on the camera back on, and we can show you what the app looks like. For example, on an iPad, I've got an iPad here, and I'll touch the custom control icon. So custom control is running on the iPad. The login screen will present me again with a list of the compatible devices on my network. And I can see my dLive mix rack. Username, I'm using the admin username in this case and no password. Touch connect, and you can see how quickly this will download the user interface and display it on my iPad. So in this case, I'm pretending to be the AV system tech, going around the venue, tweaking the level of front fills and delays. Again, you can see possibly the faders moving on the C1500, and I can even change some of the presets. So I can go from the orchestra to the musical preset with my iPad. But David, I believe you have some somewhat more basic interface for you on a phone.
Oh, cool. Do I get to do the front fills and the orchestra as well?
Not really. No, I locked you down to a very limited set of controls.
So I've got basic source selection and level control, which again, I can hear the faders moving behind me. So it's very, very simple, but actually quite elegant. Yes,
and again, to reinforce this point, this interface is now living in a mixing system. We have nothing loaded on our wireless devices other than the actual app that you can get for free from the App Store or Google Play Store. All right, so if we go back to the presentation for a second, just to show you some other examples of typical scenarios where custom control might be very, very useful indeed. This is our meeting room in a corporate setting, and you can see I have very basic level control for the audio. Once again, some preset buttons, so I can go from a video call configuration to our remote video configuration or whatever. Another one we have here, maybe a hospitality setting, a hotel or something, plus and minus buttons to control the level in different zones, and some buttons on the bottom to select the source for the music. Similarly, in a restaurant, you might have different tabs on the top to control different areas. And within those areas, you might still want separate controls for booth 1 to 8 and booth 9 to 18 with a separate mute button and even a separate source selector to select the source for that zone. This other example, even more simplistic, so you can touch on any of those icons or pictures to change the source for the music, and again, up and down level control for the volume. And finally, a sort of educational example for a school or a college, where you might want a couple of tabs, one to control some video, perhaps using GPIO in the dLive system or custom MIDI, and a tab for the audio. And in this case, I'm showing some buttons to switch on or off some sources like the lecturer microphone, the radio microphones for the audience, the presentation audio for the PC, and then a very basic level control on a fader. So I hope that that was useful and to give you an idea of how we can design the interface and how we can use it. And David, how are we doing with questions?
We have quite a few actually. I've been noting some down whilst you've been talking that people have been asking, but do please keep typing your questions in. We have got time for more, and any we don't answer during the webinar, we can always pick up offline with you anyway. So let's dive in if you're ready, Nick. Well, first of all, you've obviously had some time to play with the editor. How long has it taken you to get to grips with it? How quickly can you put together an interface?
It doesn't take a lot of time, I think, and to be fair, I didn't have a lot of time because a couple of weeks ago, David came to me and said, we could do with some more example interfaces today in our information pack for the website.
I may have done
okay. And within a couple of days, we had, I don't know, 5, 6 more examples ready to go. The reality is that to control something, once you get familiar the first time with the editor, that's very, very quick indeed. So you just drag in a control object, assign it to channel 1 level, upload it to the mix rack, and in a matter of minutes, you have it running. I guess most people will spend more time tweaking the visual aspects of it in terms of the graphic interface, custom backgrounds, custom knobs to make it sophisticated, elegant, and possibly to fit into the environment where that interface is deemed to work in. So yeah, not a lot of time really.
Once you've done one, I guess it gets quicker and quicker to reuse elements.
Obviously, you can copy and paste layouts. You can start from an existing project or starting point and just customize the background, the logo, and so
on. Staying on that subject, do we have any templates to give people a starting point to work or play from?
Essentially, we have some themes for the control objects that I touched on in the demo, and those are available within the custom control editor. We have provided some example configurations to some of our distribution partners for use in their training days and demos. But the interesting thing about custom control is that you don't need a template to start with because, and it's really depending on what you want to control, how much control you want in your interface. Is it many faders? Is it just one button? That there's no limit to it really. And it's very easy to create that interface. So essentially it's a blank canvas and you can design whatever you like.
There are a number of questions around controlling external devices. I'll try and kind of group those together. Now, you mentioned the possibility of MIDI messages.
Yes.
It'd be good to get some ideas of how you might want to use that. Also, is it capable of doing things like GPIO? And is there any provision for third-party devices, e.g. sending strings via Telnet?
Oh, Telnet. Telnet, we haven't really considered it because I think it's somewhat a legacy protocol, which we had with our old install line of products, for example. And everything nowadays seems to be moving towards TCP/IP messages instead. So if you take any, we mentioned Crestron, Extron control systems earlier, but any AV device introduced now in the market should be able to talk TCP/IP directly. So what you can do with custom control, you cannot go and control those devices directly because custom control is always talking to the dLive system, to the mixing system. But the mixing system has got options, for example, to send out those MIDI strings to other devices. And it's got options to work with GPIO interfaces. So you can do a number of things with custom control. For example, you can recall different scenes in the dLive system. And the purpose of those scenes might be simply to change the GPIO messages or contacts on an output to, for example, switch on a projector. If you're familiar with the dLive, you will know that you can filter anything else out of that scene. So that scene will only effectively switch on the projector, and with a button in custom controller, I can do just that. So there are multiple ways of interacting with third-party devices.
Okay, I'd like to ask you a very specific application. One of our audience members has has posted. So they're working in houses of worship, and they would like to eliminate the need for outboard DSP when they're mixing classrooms. Is there a mechanism to allow scene changes in the auditorium that don't affect the audio channels and controllers throughout the rest of the building?
Absolutely. So a dLive system will give you a lot of horsepower and channel processing capability, up to 128 inputs, 64 outputs, many different mixes which can serve different rooms in a building. For example, we even have up to 4 discrete AMM mixers in the dLive that can serve for simultaneous meetings in different rooms. And again, the scene system, the memory system is so granular that you can say, actually, when I make this change, I only want this particular room to change, but I don't want to affect any other room in my building, as the user was saying. So yeah, that's possible.
Great. Okay. Let me just cast my eye over some more of the questions that we've had. Is there any way of seeing how many devices are connected, and is there any limit on the number of devices that can be connected to your dLive system?
That's a very good question. So there is a way of seeing the total number of TCP connections to our dLive mix rack, to the engine of the system. That number is inclusive of any control surface, any laptop running dLive Director, any iPad app, including custom control, and also IP controllers. So you have to be careful in how you read it, because it doesn't break down the type of devices at the moment.
Okay.
It just gives you the total amount of connections. Now, that amount of connections can go up to 40 TCP connections to a single mix rack. So that's a limitation that we have now in the dLive system. We're looking at possibly extending or raising that number in future, but that's certainly something that system integrators have to bear in mind now. So up to 40 total users or instances of control of a dLive.
Okay, that's good to know. Understandably, we're being asked whether custom control will be compatible with any of our other mixing systems, Q, SQ, GLD.
Yeah, well, I was half expecting that question. The answer is no, unfortunately. So custom control is working with the dLive system only. Obviously, we built the app with a plan to support future products that will come out in the next few years, and hopefully to make them compatible with custom control. Compatibility with Q and SQ would be very hard to achieve, because they speak fundamentally a different language, a different control protocol. So it's not as simple as linking to a different mixer. I should add, though, that with Q, we have a very powerful little app called Q Control, which is for iOS only, but it is a customizable control app where you can put up to 15 control widgets in a grid, and up to 5 different tabs with 15 widgets each. And these can be anything from a mute button to a scene recall to a control, a level control again. So although it's not as sophisticated or multi-platform as custom control, it's definitely an option for some very basic control of a Q mixer.
Yeah, we've seen some interesting applications of that in more budget-conscious applications where the audio needs are simpler. And when we've been demonstrating that, we've used a Q-Pack or a QSB, so a faderless Q mixer, and then we've used the iPod Touch as a very affordable form of kiosk mode Apple device, which is a really affordable solution. Right. A couple of questions around actually how you do the layouts within Custom Control Editor. Is it possible to lock elements from editing? And also, can you group elements together?
The answer is no to both questions. So there is no grouping as such. It's been requested. It's something that we put on the list for possible future releases of the software. and the grouping, and the other one was locking. Again, that's not available at the moment. With the grouping, obviously you can select multiple items with dragging your mouse cursor and then move them all together. So that's possible. You can also copy paste cat a selection of controls as opposed to a single one. So that would be fine.
Here's an interesting one that I hadn't thought of. So if the scenes, the layouts are saved in the dLive mix rack, are they visible in any way from the dLive control surface? If there is a control surface in the installation, can they see what's been uploaded to the mix rack?
No, that's not possible. So the control surface and the dLive director will keep seeing all of the DSP parameters on all of the channels, but not the custom control interface. So to see what's loaded in the mix rack, you will need the custom control editor. And as I said at the start, you can actually use the editor to download the configuration file from the mix rack so that you can check actually what's running in terms of custom control on that system.
Okay, now it's a few quick fire requests without that much context. MCA, dynamic controls, and pages.
Oh, okay. So MCA, yeah, I can see why you might want MCAs in custom control. It's not an option that we have available now. The development of custom control was sort of in parallel with dLive 1.8 and all of the development that has gone into the MCAs. So it was a hard one to put into the first version of the software, certainly. But again, it's one that we can consider for the future. Dynamic controls such as compressor and gate, not once again not in the custom control editor. Bear in mind, I know that a lot of people will get creative and try to use custom control for personal monitoring and a number of live applications, which is absolutely fine, and we are very happy to see this flexibility with the tools we give you. But the original intended main use was obviously to serve the installation market. That's why things like compressor thresholds and ratios were not necessarily at the top of our list. Pages, I assume we're talking about different pages of interface, and that is certainly possible by using the tab container. But also, as I said, potentially you could use different scenes in your dLive system to deploy a new interface every time you recall a different scene, and essentially have multiple interfaces running for the same user and device.
Yeah, yeah. The tabs are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. There are others who'd be interested in MCAs, though.
Okay, well, I'll bear that in mind.
Right. Let's just run through the ones I noted down earlier. Now, kiosk mode.
Yeah.
Could you take us through what is implemented in custom control to protect devices in kiosk mode?
Let me just show you briefly the help file that you can find in the custom control editor. So the custom control editor and the apps are available for free on our website and or on the App Store. So please go and check it out from our website. You can download it and play around with it for free, even without a physical dLive system. So you can just play around with the designer interface. And at the very end of the help file, there is a page on kiosk mode, and you can see a set of instructions on iOS and Android devices. On iOS, it's pretty easy to configure. It's essentially part of the guided access options in the operating system. With Android devices, though, a couple of things. One is you can only enable kiosk mode if you run unprovisioned Android devices. Essentially, it means devices without any user account on them. Mm-hmm. So they have to be sort of factory default or factory reset to work in kiosk mode. And the other thing is that you will need to go into the command line in Android Studio and type in a set of controls to enable kiosk mode, and that would only work with a special version of the app that we have available on our website. So the public one on the Android Google Play Store is not kiosk mode capable.
Okay, good to know.
If you want kiosk mode for a fixed iPad, or sorry, not an iPad obviously, but
Other
a fixed
tablets are available.
Android tablet in the wall, then you can go and download this special version once again for free, and you can follow these instructions to set it into kiosk mode.
Eduardo is asking, when you use the scenes to change the custom control layout, should we consider blocking everything on the recall filter?
Yes, that's a very good idea. So if the only purpose of the scene is just to change the user interface, then you would probably want to go into the recall filter of that scene, block everything, and that scene will only essentially trigger a new interface for custom control.
Great, we're getting very close to the hour now. Actually, we've been talking for a while, so we'll just do one or two more questions, and there are a few more which we haven't answered. We will pick up offline if we don't get to them now. I think I know the answer to this one, but are there any plans to incorporate AEC, any other tools for use in conference room type applications?
That's an interesting one. That's something, obviously, as you know, we are always working on new projects and developing new technology. Yes, it would be nice to go back into the dedicated install market at some point. It's not something we can promise today, of course, but rest assured that we're always looking at how we can make best use of our DSP processing and technology know-how and apply it into other markets and into other channels.
We've been asked whether we'll be sharing this webinar recording on YouTube. Yes, we do 2 webinars, and we'll share one of them on YouTube, quite probably this one, depending on the audio quality and all of those things. We certainly will be sharing it, and we can send around a link so you can watch it again if that's what you'd like to do. Nick, you've also created a white paper which covers custom control.
Yes, that should be on the website now. Yeah. So it's a very simple PDF document, and it will go through a bit of background on why we need control systems for AV. It might seem obvious to many of you, but it's good to reflect a little bit on what these control systems do and how they are converging with control systems of many other aspects of the building control. So things from EVAC to air conditioning to light control, and very often the user expectation is to have a single app controlling all of that.
Yeah.
So we are exploring some of these technologies and options in the white paper, so please download it and have a look.
Well, I think it's a really, really exciting tool, and I can't wait to see some of the things that our users will create with it, because we have our own ideas about how custom control can be applied. But as always happens, I'm sure we'll see some things we never thought of.
Oh, yes.
So thank you very much for taking part and for asking your questions. It's been great chatting with you today, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thanks, and bye.